Hi, I'm Nora. I'm 17, and my mum has been struggling with being a hoarder for more than 5 years. It sounds innocent enough, but believe me, it's not. It all started 5 years ago when I was 12 and my brother Caleb was 8. That year, our dad died of cancer, and it was honestly really, really tough for everyone, but especially for my mum. She began hoarding stuff in our house. It was so dirty and filthy that it was impossible to walk around in it without slippers. Just a few minutes with no shoes and our feet would be black from the dirt. Every room was full of boxes, newspapers, clothes, shoes and furniture. It was so insane that we only had small openings to move through, and even then there was a lot of stuff on the ground, and Mum would always be bringing more and more stuff home. Our kitchen was so full with kitchenwares and unwashed dishes that Mum usually just ordered something so we wouldn't have to clean it ourselves. The worst thing was bugs and other living things. We always had cockroaches, mice and rats. To the outside world, we were a normal family, but of course, Mum never let anyone inside to see how it really was. I couldn't wait until I turned 18 so I could leave and go and study somewhere, but I knew I couldn't because of my brother. You see, living in these conditions had affected him much worse than it did me. He was always sick and had a ton of allergies. There was never a day when he wouldn't sneeze a bunch of times. I couldn't just leave him there like that. And my mother either. Every time I tried to talk to her about throwing something away, she would try to justify how important everything was. "Oh, don't throw this old magazine away. I haven't finished it. Don't throw out this box. We may need it." I couldn't let me and Caleb live like that anymore, so one week when my mum went on a short vacation and we were supposed to stay at our Aunt Rose's house, we decided to clean our house. Aunt Rose helped us hire cleaners and movers, and over the span of a week we were able to clean up 2 rooms. Yes, there was so much stuff that in a week we didn't even finish. I never expected my mum's reaction when she came back. She was upset and angry and was rambling on about how everything we threw out had value and how we had to get it back. She stopped talking to Aunt Rose and was upset with me for a long time. Very soon, everything went back to normal, and she found and bought more stuff to fill up the rooms that had been cleaned. It was painful to see how bad Caleb felt in this house, so I had to try and talk some sense into my mum again. Needless to say, she didn't want to listen to me or to accept that she had a problem, an illness. But then something happened that made things much worse. When our house was getting repaired, we had to move to Aunt Rosa's family house. To be honest, I liked living there. It was clean and neat, and it was such a breath of fresh air, literally. The best thing was that Caleb's health was improving. His allergies had subsided, and he was much more healthy. It was wonderful to see him being active and happy, while he was usually very passive. It's like he was a completely different kid. I can't say the same about my mum, though. She was being closely monitored by me, Aunt Rose, and her husband. She was constantly crying, and Aunt Rose wouldn't let her start hoarding stuff again, so I guess my mum felt very uncomfortable, and even trapped. It turns out that my mum had this obsession with hoarding long before our dad's death. And the reason was, I wasn't her first child. She and my dad had a son a few years before me, but he was a very sick child, so after a year, he died. And Mum was devastated. A lot of families break up after the death of a child, but my dad loved my mum so much that he stayed and supported her all those years. She started hoarding, but he always stopped her with love and care. He was truly a wonderful man. Then they had me, and then Caleb, and everything was good. But of course, he got sick and died after a few years. It devastated everyone, but especially my mum. She felt cursed and couldn't believe that she lost 2 of the people that she loved so much. So she started hoarding again, but this time she had no one who could really help her stop. And to top it off, she refused to go to a doctor. I couldn't believe it, but I suddenly felt so much remorse for getting mad at my mum. I wanted to help her, but I couldn't just start talking about this out of the blue, so I started with becoming a bit more patient with her. After a month or 2, we moved back to our house. I knew I had to change my approach if I wanted to help with her problem. I read some tips online, and instead of saying that she should throw something out because it was worthless, I would say something like, "Oh, look how good and useful this is. How about giving it to someone who needs it?" My mum liked this idea of giving something to people who needed it, and I would always help her with finding people. And you know what? We started bonding over it, and she would open up to me about what was troubling her, and I would in turn talk to her about Caleb and his needs. After a while, she finally agreed to go to therapy, and while she still hoards stuff, it's gotten much, much better. I'm still afraid that I will need to stay after graduation because everything would break apart without me, but I have to do it for the good of my mum and Caleb. Have any of you encountered hoarders in your life? What is your experience with them? Please tell your stories in the comments, and like this video if you found it interesting or learned something new.